Okay, so I previously made a video talking about rounding to decimal places, which is a very important skill and something that comes up on a lot of different questions. It's necessary in a lot of different questions, so it's very useful to know what you're doing with that. And I mentioned in that video that in addition to rounding to decimal places, lots of students struggle with rounding to significant figures. So that is what I'm going to make a video about now, rounding to significant figures. And this is going to use a lot of the same skills as the rounding to decimal places topic. So check that video out first maybe before you look at this. But let me just change my pen width. There we go. Let's get into it. So I'll use an example to demonstrate the method. So there's a question here, round 52691 to one significant figure. Okay, so when we were learning about rounding to decimal places, I told you to underline the digit that you were going to keep, or digits. Now in this case, we're going to keep the first digit. So the significant figures are counted from the start of the number, and in this case you want the first digit, okay? And then we're going to check the next digit to see if we're going to round it or keep it the same. So in this case we can see that 2 is between 1 and 4, and remember the rule is if it's 1 to 4 you keep it the same, if it's 5 and above you round it up. So in this case we're going to keep it the same. But here's the catch when you're doing significant figures. You must ensure that the digit keeps its place value. So for example, here it's quite straightforward. This 5 is in the 5th column, right? Which is the 10,000ths column. That doesn't really matter, it's the 5th column. So it starts in the 5th column, it has to be in the 5th column here. It's not at the moment, it's in the 1st column. So to rectify that, we're just going to add zeros until it's in the right column. So that's the method, and you're going to add zeros to make sure that your number ends up in the right column. Let me do another one as an example. I'll do this one to two significant figures. So let's say 6551 to two significant figures. Okay, so I'm underlining the digits that I'm going to keep, the first two digits of the number. And the proper rule is it's the first two digits that are not 0. That will become relevant when we look at decimals. So I've underlined my first two digits, and I look at the next one to decide whether I'm going to round it or keep it the same. Now it's 5 or above, so that means I'm going to round it up. So my 65 becomes 66. But they must stay in the right column. So this needs to be in the thousandths column, and this needs to be in the hundredths column. To rectify that, we can just add 2 zeros on. I'll demonstrate rounding to three significant figures just for completion's sake. So let's say we've got 5067 to three significant figures. Underline my first three digits. 1, 2, 3. Check the next one. It tells us we're going to round it up, so my 506 becomes a 507, but to keep everything in the right column, this needs to be in the 10ths column, this needs to be in the 10th column. I add a 0, so rounded to three significant figures, we've got 5070. So the difference between rounding to decimal places and rounding to significant figures is, when you're rounding to decimal places, you count digits after the decimal point. When you're rounding to significant figures, you count from the start of the number. So we also need to explore rounding decimals to significant figures, and the method is going to be the same apart from one small detail which I'm going to write down. The method is basically the same, but you only count digits from the first digit that is not 0. For instance, let's round 0.06826 to one significant figure. Okay, so I'm underlining the first digit that's not a 0, which is obviously this guy. Check the one next to it, which tells us we're going to round it up. 0.07. Now, you might be asking, well, why aren't I adding zeros at the end like I did for the numbers that were bigger than 1? And the answer is, adding zeros doesn't change the column that this 7 is in. The 7 is in the tenths column in this case, and adding zeros at the end doesn't change that. It's still in the tenths column even if I add the zeros. So you don't need to add the zeros when you're rounding decimals to significant figures. Only if the number is in the wrong column, and that only happens with bigger numbers. So I'll just do a couple more examples. Let's do 0.00375 to 2 significant figures. So this time I'm underlining the first 2 digits that are not 0. Those are the first 2 that are not 0. Check the next one. That tells us we're going to round it up. So it becomes 0.0038. No need to add anything on the end. Now let's do one that's a bigger number but still has decimals. So we'll try 34.726 to 3 significant figures. So I start underlining my digits from the first one that is not 0, which is my 3. We're doing 3 significant figures. It doesn't matter that we cross the decimal point. This method doesn't care about the decimal point. Check the next number. It tells us to keep it the same. 34.7. Don't need to add anything else because everything is in the right column. There you go. So again, the method is quite straightforward. Something students struggle with is getting them mixed up, rounding significant figures and decimal places. So it's very important that you know which method is which and that you use them at the right time. And you know when to use them because a question will say round to significant figures or round to decimal places. If you have any questions, please leave it in the comments. I would love to answer some questions. Any comments like criticisms, the same, put it down there. And if you have any requests for other videos that you want me to do, just let me know. Thanks.